We're going to have a little fun with collecting baseball cards. And the title of this talk is Bringing the Fun Back into Collecting, Part 1, talking about facial hair, particularly mustaches. And if we think about mustaches and baseball, they've currently become really hand in hand. And just for fun, some of you might want to check out these 16 photos and see if you can guess who these players are just by the facial hair that they wear. And maybe you'll recognize some of these players as we go through the different cards representing the facial hair of the Major League Baseball. So as a reference to where all these inputs come from, I've listed many of the internet sites that you can kind of refer to and kind of get a broader prescription of what each of these particular styles are. But we'll start off by going way back in time, actually around 1869 to 1914, where many of the baseball players had mustaches. So we go back to one of the first teams, which was 1869 Cincinnati Red Stockings. And not much later, we can go to the Chicago White Stockings of 1885. And you can notice that many of the players, not necessarily every one in this picture, but the majority have mustaches. And then we'll talk about later, when we talk about beards, we'll talk about the House of David, kind of notorious for their beards during Major League Baseball. So 1869 to 1914, the history of facial hair in baseball. And it starts off with Harry Wright, which we talked about, the Cincinnati Red Stockings, and it wasn't just a mustache, but also a beard when he started that in those days. And then 1871, a very famous player in the sense of being in the Hall of Fame was Cap Anson, which had a classic mustache of that particular era, and other kind of similarities to that type of mustache was a Jim O'Rourke mustache, was kind of extended a little beyond the face back in 1872. And this gentleman played until he was 50. And then Monte wore kind of a gentleman's gentleman, had a perfectly waxed and sleek mustache. And we'll see kind of a representative of this in almost modern day baseball. And then there was Mike King Kelly. He had a handlebar mustache and red hair. And Paul Gavin had a chevron, kind of the standard mustache that you'll see today, in fact, with a lot of baseball players. And finally, in 1914, was Wally Shang. And that was the last to wear a mustache until the 30s, as we'll get into in the future. And though his card didn't have him with the mustache, you can see photographs did. And he was pretty much the last player for a while, for several decades before the mustache reappeared. So 1930s, facial hair was actually prohibited in order to make the game more appealing to families. So the people who were trying to sell tickets and draw people into the stadiums, they felt that beards and mustaches were offensive to the young fans, so that they kind of had, and you'll find out this is an unwritten rule, of not having facial hair on the players. So in 1936, Frenchy Bogaderia, he grew a thin mustache for a part as a movie extra during the off season. And when he went to report to Dodgers camp in 1936, he continued to wear that mustache. And lots of headlines kind of reported this. It was like a major change in baseball to see someone with a mustache and playing. And it was the first facial hair a player had sported in decades. Like we said, the last time it was seen was in 1914, and now it appears in 1936. Not for very long, though. He didn't play long wearing that mustache, but it was enough for him to become a media sensation, not because of his baseball skills, but because of wearing a mustache in professional baseball. Now, Reggie Jackson in 1972, when he joined the Oakland A's, and this rule, or kind of assumed rule, was in place, he, being such a star, he felt that on black men, a mustache told a different story. It was fashionable, but it was much more than that. On a black man, it signified values, perseverance, seriousness, and rigor. It was a major part of that particular culture. So here we have Jackson up until 1972, where on the A's, he arrives to spring training with that mustache and is going to maintain that mustache. And so because of that, he showed up for training with a mustache, and Charlie Finley, the owner of the team, kind of made a positive out of this. In fact, he offered, as we'll see, the team, anybody on the team who grew a mustache within that year would get a bonus of $300. But Jackson didn't stop just there. In the next year, he continued that mustache to a full beard. And then when he joined the Yankees, it's back to a mustache, because we'll learn that the Yankees would not allow facial hair below the chin or on the neck whatsoever. So he got rid of it. And that's kind of the card back then that was initially made when he went on the Orioles, but then really kind of signed up with the Yankees. Not only was it Jackson that basically started the mustache again, but also players on the team like Hall of Famer Jim Catfish Hunter, as you see in his rookie card, didn't have a mustache, but then later in that 73 also grew a mustache, as we'll see. And also when he joined the Yankees, he couldn't grow a beard, but kind of joined them at the same time that Reggie Jackson did. So we have now on the Oakland A's, we have this movement towards wearing mustaches, so much so that when we look at when we see the kind of continuation of the World Series championships by the Oakland A's, all of them, or it seems like all of them, but not all of them, were wearing mustaches they referred to as the Mustache Gang. So here we have a picture of Charlie Finley with several of the players who donned mustaches for his team. And we see the 75 cards, which represent the 74 winners. I remember they won in 72, 73, and 74. And he had his beard. And then we have Jim Hunter, we just talked about, Hall of Fame. Other Hall of Famers, so, were Raleigh Fingers, had a classic mustache that we'll talk about a little bit later. And Billy Williams, who really got his fame and fortune with the Cubs, but was on that A's team, and other kind of well-known players because they were kind of superstars in terms of winning 3 World Series in a row. Joe Rudy, Jim Tenace, Sal Bando, Ken Holtzman. And then we have lesser-known players like Dick Green, Ray Fawcett, Claude Washington, and Bill North, and then just the subs. But at the end of this particular photo, you will see players that were kind of known during that time, Vida Blue and Bert Campaneris and Manny Trio, and also the manager of the team, who was Alvin Dark, that did not don mustache. So not everybody wore them, but it was pretty classic at that particular time. Because remember, prior to this, in the history of baseball, after 1914, there were really few, if any, except for a rare occasion with Frenchie, that mustaches were donned or worn. So what are some popular names for mustache as they begin to appear more and more in baseball after the 1972 season and beyond? And we see that there's a pyramid mustache, and obviously where it got its name from here, it looks like a pyramid. And then we have the chevron mustache. It really covers most right below the nose all the way to the upper lip. Kind of a classic mustache. They have a lampshade mustache in terms of what shape is assumed by that. And you also have the painter's mustache, which kind of looks like a painter's brush underneath the person's nose. And you'll also have a pencil mustache, speaks for itself. It's a thin line underneath the nose, as well as what is called the daddy of all mustaches. And this is just an example of that. So we have popular names of mustaches, and then it goes on, and you see all of these different types of mustaches. And we'll see as we go through mustache and beard, there's over 100 different types and shapes and designs of these basically facial hair. And going on to give you more names that are kind of classically used again and again by different people for their mustaches. There's the sharp lip stache, the Raleigh Fingers, who became famous because of his mustache, the lip sweater, the toothbrush, the sex symbol, the Confucius, the lip foliage, the rectangle, the chaplain, the walrus, the suave, the lando, the comb, all popular mustaches. And the popularity of beards and mustaches in Major League Baseball in 2014 in the All-Star game, those with facial hair actually outperformed clean-shaven counterparts. Now, it's just an observation, maybe a coincidence, but it's interesting that they would go that far to do research to see if wearing facial hair improved your play. You'll also find that between 1977 and 1988, 22 out of 24 Rolaids Relief Award winners had either mustaches or beards. And it seems like pitchers always have to be some kind of an eccentric group or things like this. But this is a kind of a neat description of the facial hair of adults in Major League Baseball. And it really, if you kind of are interested, it shows you the percent of the players that had the different types of facial hair, the different types of beards and so forth. And below that, you'll see what percent each team basically had of players that were wearing facial hair at the time. And you'll see examples of those individuals and their different types of beards. So kind of an interesting, and you'll see here, we'll get to this further as we talk about beards, especially. None of these teams include the New York Yankees, who are prohibited from wearing facial hair beyond mustaches. And it doesn't include September call-ups, who have seen little playing time. So trademark signature mustache. So now we're looking at, as we look at the players from 1971 and beyond, we're going to look at those players who kind of, you recognize them because of their mustaches. One example is Dave Steve, and many I kind of showed them before when they had no facial hair, and then when they finally had the classic signatures or trademarks. So you see what Dave Steve is kind of remembered as looking like. And then we have Andre Dawson, and he looked like that when he became a rookie. He looked like that in his playing years. Wade Boggs is very familiar in terms of his classic mustache. And then some of these players go on to add more facial hair. So he included beard later on. And then we have a more known for his coaching skills and managerial skills than a player is Jim Leyland, who continued throughout his whole career, including coaching. As you see, kind of just the color gets more white or more gray on him. Classic player that always had a mustache was Barry Bonds, but it kind of goes in reverse. So Barry Bonds starts out when he's comes called up for the majors for the Pirates around 1986. And then later on, you kind of can barely make out if he is in his photos on the cards. And this is why kind of a close-up of post Major League Baseball, where he has no mustache at all. In fact, no hair at all, as he's kind of shaved his head. Then we have the classic Don Mattingly, Yankee player, so you're not going to expect a beard, but he does don a mustache later on in his career. Because a classic kind of look for Don Mattingly. Mike Piazza starts off when we first see him playing for the Mets with a classic mustache, continues through his career. And like some of these other players, they kind of go in reverse. So later on in his career, it kind of gets more of a stubble. And then when the pictures we see of him lately, it's kind of clean shaven, kind of almost a clean shaven look, almost looks younger because of it. Then we have someone who's bound to make the Hall of Fame, and recently incredible performer as a pitcher with the Houston Astros is Justin Verlander. And classic when his Bowman kind of pre-rookie card comes out, it's kind of like a weak growth. I mean, it's kind of really kind of a strong beard, kind of just beginning, but later on in his career becomes a very significant beard that becomes his signature appearance. Another player, son of a famous baseball player and Prince Fielder, kind of had the beard and mustache, and it kind of gets thicker as the years go on, and he continues to play in the big leagues. Moving on to Hall of Famers, trademark mustaches. So these are some Hall of Famers. Classic one, of course, is Mike Schmidt. Early years, no facial hair, and then his classic mustache. Another player is Dave Winfield, kind of that classic kind of chevron mustache he starts out, but then he kind of adds a little bit to it later on in his career with the sideburns. And then we have Robin Yount, kind of 1975 rookie card. And as we follow him through his career, he kind of establishes that kind of a mustache, as well as Jim Rice starts out with a mustache, and he continues to his playing career with a mustache. Another classic mustache is Edgar Martinez, but again, he kind of transitions later on in his career and shaves it off and just has a kind of the stubble. So there is a type of mustache, and some of these mustaches get different names, but they're the same type of mustache. A lot of people who are familiar with Groucho Marx will say there's certain players who have a Groucho Marx mustache. A good example is Rick Sweet. He starts off with kind of a regular mustache, but then he kind of gets like a Groucho Marx type. And even today in his older years, as he's kind of coaching and so forth, he puts more facial hair, kind of a goatee and a mustache. And then we look at Yogi Berra's son, Dale Berra, and you kind of look at it. And throughout his career, he kind of had that sort of Groucho Marx mustache look. Some players even have mustaches that are named after them. So Carl Pavano, one of the mustaches called a Pav stash. And so he starts out clean shaven, and then he kind of develops a little bit of a different look, kind of a Van Dyke, who we'll talk about later, or a circular beard. And finally, this is the classic Pav stash. It's kind of like kind of a cross between a brush and a Groucho Marx stash. Then we have the pushroom staff. And this is kind of taken after Nick Offerman on Parks and Recreation. Some people call it a walrus look or whatever. So Bobby Grish, who was a shortstop for the Orioles coming up in 1971. And then later on, then he has this kind of a brush or broom, push broom kind of mustache with this classic look that you see here on Ken Phelps, so this push broom mustache. And then we look at Dan Quisenberry, came up as a rookie with it and continued to play with this kind of push broom mustache. And kind of moving on, maybe the same thing, but sometimes given it because the guy was chunky or even had a look in addition to the mustache, they called it a walrus or bushy mustache, like this picture here. And you have a Gorman Thomas of the Brewers here in his rookie year, clean shaven. Later on in his career, kind of had that walrus mustache. Looked like kind of a husky guy, sort of like a walrus in his appearance and build. And then you have a Don Stanhouse with the frizzy hair, and eventually he develops this sort of walrus mustache for him. And then Thurman Munson was often called the walrus because of his classic mustache that he had towards the end of his career. We'll talk more about what Thurman did facial hair wise later, which will be kind of interesting. So then you have a bushy mustache, but not just a bushy mustache, but you also have bushy eyebrows. And we have the classic Bill Buckner, clean shaven, and then later on where he has a mustache, and you can see it kind of matches the eyebrows, almost comical in a way. And then Phil Garner, again, one of these players who was known perhaps better as a manager than a player, but he certainly had that combination of the bushy mustache and the bushy eyebrows. And then later on kind of phased out and kind of had the more clean shaven look. Davey Lopez, back in his day as a rookie, okay, clean shaven, but later on the bushy eyebrows and the bushy mustache. Now Robert Goulet, of course, this is kind of timed and dated, but he was kind of a suave movie actor, kind of known for his looks, but also always that classic mustache. And sometimes that mustache goes by the term chevron. I've used this before, original or standard mustache. And a lot of times the American Institute of Mustache votes on people who kind of have the best mustache of an actor or celebrity, and several baseball players, as we see, will get that. So we have Goulet, and we have Tom Selleck with the classic kind of manly looking mustache, which again, the chevron is different than the regular mustache. It's a little broader and it covers the whole upper lip. So you have Dennis Eckersley, who was kind of like a magnet for women that loved his hair and loved his mustache back when he played. And then the classic, we have Keith Hernandez. You see him early in his career, kind of clean shaven. Here's the same year, 1975, where you can see just kind of barely a glimpse of kind of a mustache starting to appear. Later on in his career, it kind of forms and it becomes kind of a little bigger. And then finally, he gets that American Mustache Institute Award for this classic or Robert Goulet mustache. Another player was Don Baylor, and you can see that clean shaven to begin with, and then develops a mustache, as well as Fred McGriff, who started out and continued to have that classic mustache. So this is a kind of a comical name to a mustache. It was called the porn stash, and it was given to those who wore it, as you'll see what it looks like. But it really kind of a combination of that and them looking sleazy, predatory, or cheaply groomed, resembling one worn by an adult film star. So there's an adult film star, apparently Ron Jeremy, who kind of has that kind of mustache and has that kind of look, but probably got its name more from Orange is the New Black, and one of the actors in there was character George Mendez, who was in real life Pablo Schreiber, and he was called Porn Stash. And so we look at the players who they kind of labeled them with this title of it, and one was Barry Zito, and you can't hardly see it in his card, but in a photograph he kind of displays that kind of combination look and mustache that's called a porn stache. Another one was Clarence Gaston, clean shaven, and this particular card, and then you see the mustache. And finally, a guy, player for the pitcher for the Atlanta Braves, Spencer Strider, they will label him having this porn stache. Okay, so a lot of times, because the players come in and of course they're young, and sometimes they take them longer to get to the maturity where they can really grow or mustache very rapidly. So you'll have some players that go under the description of a starter mustache or peach fuzz or squiggle on the upper lip. And one of these was Derek Holland, and you can kind of see when he was with the Rangers, it's kind of, is he just growing it, or how many years has he had that? It's still kind of weak. Another player, very popular, very successful in baseball, and looking very young in his rookie year, was Frank Viola. And in the early years when he tried to don a mustache, it wasn't really kind of really established yet. So fit into that category of peach fuzz and so forth. Then there's the classic handlebar mustache, sometimes called the villain mustache or the abracadabra mustache. And you kind of see it in old silent movies and so forth, with the villain and the girl. And then we look at the Cincinnati Reds, their mascot, Mr. Redlegs, and he kind of goes from 1953 with that kind of handlebar mustache to kind of clean shaven through 68 up to 99, and back to kind of the villain mustache or the handlebar mustache in 2007. We have the classic. Now we're getting to the classic mustache that's even given his name. So sometimes this mustache is really referred to as a Raleigh Fingers mustache, as you'll see in this picture. He had this mustache when he pitched for the Oakland A's, and also continued when he played for the Brewers. Another player, John Axford, is, if you look up facial hair of baseball players, he's always kind of represented because of this particular mustache, where at one time he had kind of Van Dyke, but as he kind of went further in the league, he developed that same classic Raleigh Fingers mustache. Then Daniel Megden, you can see the resemblance in terms of the type of mustache, kind of has to be waxed and curved and so forth. And another player, Clay Zavada, and he has a photograph of himself in that classic mustache. So we talk about the pencil mustache, and actor that kind of represented this in the early days in Hollywood was a guy called David Niven. It's just kind of a thin mustache, as you can see in these pictures here. And so someone who kind of has a mustache like that was the Hall of Famer Greg Maddux. Here you see him in the rookie year, clean shaven, and then in his rookie card, he has that kind of very thin mustache that they would call a pencil mustache. Another player was Dave Chalk, and again, here's that kind of a thin, kind of weak mustache that he sported. Probably the most classic mustache that we see and we kind of recognize players having, and kind of makes them look mean, angry, and scary, is called the Fu Manchu. Now, if you look up Fu Manchu, the picture that they'll show for it is the classic Asian individual, and it doesn't really look like that in the baseball players. It really looks more like the Hulk Hogan that we think of, that kind of Fu Manchu, and he kind of represents that a lot of times when you think Fu Manchu. So looking at the ball players, the first one that comes to mind to most people is Al Hrabowski, who was sometimes labeled or gave the nickname of the Mad Hungarian because of the demeanor of the Fu Manchu, was mistaken, because he really wasn't, mistaken for anger. And then we see him clean shaven here, and then later on you can see that kind of, wow, thick, kind of down to the chin and curved mustache. So that was there for a while, and it kind of reappeared with a player called Taylor Tankersley, who brought back the Fu Manchu in 2010, and even though he kind of has pictures of him kind of sporting that Fu Manchu, I haven't seen any baseball cards, though, with him carrying that particular mustache, but nonetheless, he's given credit for bringing it back into baseball. So the Fu Manchu characters, most classic probably is Rick Gossage, had that kind of mean look, and he's made the Hall of Fame as a reliever. Then you got Pete Vukovich, who kind of played a long time with that Fu Manchu, and he was actually in a movie that was called Major League. He played a guy called Glue Hayward with that kind of look, that kind of Fu Manchu, evil, tough man look. A big hitter for the Detroit Tigers was Willie Horton, who most of his career had that Fu Manchu. Dave Kingman, a home run hitter and a strikeout leader. He carried a kind of a weak, but they sometimes refer to this mustache that he's wearing as a Fu Manchu. And his teammate, when he was on the Mariners, Steve Balboni, he really started off in the rookie year with a kind of a weak Fu Manchu, and then it kind of got broader and broader the more that he played. We also see this in Dave Henderson, who kind of was a player with the A's, and in their second kind of World Series run, and with the Fu Manchu. And then Dick Tedrow, he's kind of known for his Fu Manchu, as well as this player here, Rod Beck, kind of, again, that reliever, that kind of mean, kind of eccentric look to him. So very popular, and it continues to kind of show up in players throughout the years of baseball. Doc Ellis was a overpowering pitcher, and he sported a Fu Manchu. Louis Tiant not only pitched for the Indians, but also the Red Sox, and Fu Manchu. Todd Jones, and then Danny Espinosa had a real thick Fu Manchu, kind of real evident in terms of the space it takes up. And another player, Randy Donback, carried that kind of really expressive Fu Manchu. And then later on, I haven't seen a card of him, but I've seen pictures, kind of develops, instead of the Fu Manchu, kind of a funky beard that kind of continues his facial hair kind of experimentation. And then finally, you've got something that probably could go under the heading of Fu Manchu, but it's referred to, as you'll see in the picture, a horseshoe mustache. So here we see Sal Fasano, who's clean shaven as he comes in a rookie. And then the cards, you see sort of this curved in mustache. It's not really touching at the bottom, and it's really evident in his picture here when he played for the Phillies. So lots of different types of mustaches, lots of kind of interesting cards to collect around the mustache. And we'll continue this discussion in part 2, where we go into, now we'll add a beard, and we'll kind of look into the progression of the beard in Major League Baseball. So if you are interested in learning additional information about the baseball card industry, the history of baseball cards, profiting and investing in baseball cards, or ideas to bring, as I did hopefully today, fun back to collecting, be sure to follow us below. Feel free to view our library of YouTube videos, and please take a moment and hit the subscribe button. Also, check out our eBay store, where we have available for sale many of the cards shown on these videos.